I'm
Don Dickinson is not here. Linda Jackson, I know, is trying to join us, but is not here yet. Lorenzo Jones.
Here.
Great. Cesar Lagleva.
Present.
Amy Lykover.
Here.
Diana Lopez.
Here.
Rena Lopez is excused. Tom Monahan.
Present.
John Previtali has not yet joined us, but I know he's planning on it. Daniel Ryan.
Here.
And Joanne Webster.
here.
Great. And our first order of business is to accept the summary of the prior meeting in January. And Diana Lopez, I know that you sent a few comments on that, which we will incorporate. Are there any changes or comments? Amy, yes?
These are my words anyway. I'd like them to be added in some form. Concern was voiced about issuing a survey about housing that could drive policy unless it is administered in a scientific manner to avoid redundant answers. I did receive an answer from one of you, but that was part of the brainstorming. And then also I'm on page 4 after, I think it might have been, I'm not sure if it was Daniel, who is the developer on our team?
Daniel and Tom are both
Okay, it might have been after one of you two gentlemen said the look at sustainability and how the housing is, how the building is built as well as the system's operations. It's about, I don't know, 8 down on page 4. I mentioned larger, denser housing may not reflect the character of San Rafael. Like
Thanks. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other edits or changes? Okay, and I do want to welcome Linda. You're now on the screen. And we now will take any comments from, actually we need to take a vote to approve the meeting summary. So with the edits incorporated, would someone like to move approval of those or acceptance, I guess?
I'd like to move that we accept the summary as amended.
And I heard 4 or 5 people second that. Okay, any abstentions or no votes? So we'll consider those minutes or that summary accepted. And now, if there is anyone in the public in the attendees area who would like to make a comment, we give you actually a couple of opportunities to do that. You'll have an opportunity after the needs assessment discussion. But if there's anyone who wants to make a comment at this point on the agenda, please go ahead and use the raise hand feature and we'll call you and bring you over to make that comment. You will again have another opportunity later in the meeting. Okay, I don't see any hands up. So I believe we're going to move into our main agenda item, which is the discussion of housing needs. And what we'd like to do, this is really the entire meeting today. We're going to begin with a PowerPoint presentation that highlights some of the data that we sent to you in the agenda packet. And then I reached out, I think, to everybody on the working group yesterday with an email asking that each of you share your perspectives on housing needs in the community based on your experience, either as a resident, as somebody who works in San Rafael, as somebody who works with housing issues in San Rafael, just based on your own experience. And if you are on this working group representing or as a voice for a particular group, to maybe share with us your thoughts about the housing needs of that group or some of the concerns or issues you may have about housing, both from the data that we present and from your own experience. And just to provide some context for this, there's a lot of data in this process. We actually are required by the state to collect a lot of this information. But the state also, in reviewing our housing element and determining whether it's adequate, wants us to interpret the data and add a local lens to it. So it's not just what do the numbers tell us, it's what are folks who live in San Rafael telling us, and people who work here telling us, and those who have needs telling us. And you're, I think, an enormous brain trust here on the screen to help us answer that question and give some depth to the needs assessment and really some perspective. So really the second hour of this meeting is focused on your remarks and thoughts and a conversation that I'm hoping we all can have about housing needs and some of the ways that the city can orient its policies and programs to be more effective and to meet those needs. So at the last meeting, we really focused on how did we do with what we adopted 8 years ago. This is really shifting gears toward where are we and where do we need to go in the next 8 years. Before I share my screen and begin a presentation, actually, I see Diana, you have your hand up, but let me ask if there are any questions or comments. Otherwise, I'm just going to start the show.
Yeah, I do have a question before we start, Barry. You asked us to do some fairly, some specific work and present the work, present today. I've gone through the assessment and I have some, do you want me to just send you my comments, written comments, or how do you want to handle that?
Yes, please. If you have read the material and have written comments, the best thing to do would be to either email those comments or to drop off a paper copy at City Hall, whatever's easiest for you to get it to us. But yeah, I think we're not going to use our time here to say, on page 34, this word is misspelled, or I understand it might be more egregious than that, but we're really want to keep it at the big picture here.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for asking. Okay, anybody else? Great, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and can everyone see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So here's just a reminder of where we are in the housing element process. We did our introduction orientation. We have done our evaluation of the prior element. We've completed the first run at the needs assessment, first pass at the needs assessment, and are moving on to the housing sites and constraints topic. We'll be coming back to you in a month with information on housing sites and constraints and having a conversation on that. I think everyone on the call knows that the housing element has to be adopted by January 2023, but we're looking to get a draft done by the summer so that the state has time to review it over the summer and provide us with comments that we can respond to in the fall and then bring it to the Planning Commission and City Council. I included this slide really to show you that the information that's included in the needs assessment is really dictated by the state, and the right 2/3 of this slide is actually from the government code document, and it gives you the specific citations. When we submit the housing element, we're literally supposed to submit this checklist and indicate the page number on which each of these things is addressed. And there is a reviewer at the state who goes through all of this. So that is, if you're wondering why did you address that topic, that's the reason. That being said, if there are other topics that you think need to be in the needs assessment that aren't in there, we are open to your feedback and suggestions. I also wanted to include this slide about data sources because there are many data sources and they're not all consistent. And if you like things to line up perfectly, it can be very frustrating. But a lot of the data that we're working with is from what's called the American Community Survey, which is a Bureau of the Census effort to survey about 3% of the population during every calendar year, and then extrapolate that data to the whole community, sometimes at census tract or even block levels. When you get down to these very fine-grained areas, it's hard to rely on the data too heavily. So we call it the ACS data. It's the best we have on many of these topic areas, but there is a margin of error, particularly when we're talking about census tracts and things that are at a finer level than the city as a whole. On the other hand, we do have new 2020 census data. Not a lot has been released at this point, but some of the really important data points have been released about the number of residents and race and ethnicity and households and vacancies and so forth. ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, has provided us with data. We have data from the federal government, from Housing and Urban Development, from the state of California, from the county. The city of San Rafael actually collects a fair amount of data, particularly on building permits. And then private sources. We also use particularly the online real estate services like Zillow and Redfin and so forth. I also want to just ask the working group members if something I say sparks a question, or if you want to inquire about something as we go through this, feel free to ask. And you don't have to wait till the end of the presentation. So as I'm going through this, just interrupt, or I'll pause at a couple of points. Okay, so population growth, you can see on this slide that the city is growing. The city grew by about 6% between 2010 and 2020. San Rafael is not growing the way it did in the 60s and 70s, or the 50s and 60s and 70s. But there is still a fair amount of growth happening in the city, about 3,500 residents, about a 3,500 person increase between 2010 and 2020, as you can see here. That actually represented 36% of all of the growth in Marin County, which I think is kind of a significant point there, particularly since hardly any housing was built in the city during that 10-year period. The growth that took place in the 2010s was almost entirely a result of increasing household size. In other words, the number of people in each housing unit, and decreasing vacancies. So if you think back to 2010, we were in the middle of the recession. There were more vacant units. Those units are now occupied. And so even without adding any housing units, the city's population still grew. And this is what you see here are the growth rates for some of our neighboring cities over the 20-year period between 2020 and 2000 and 2020. And you can see some pretty comparable rates of growth in places like Novato and Larkspur, but slower rates of growth in San Anselmo and some of the smaller cities in the county. So this slide shows you the age distribution in 2000, 2010, and 2019. And I want to highlight the three colored circles that are on the map because they really tell the story. And that is that the fastest growing age cohort during that time period was the 65 to 74s, which saw a pretty big increase in the last 10 years as baby boomers moved into the 65 to 74 cohort. And then the increase in children between 5 and 14, we saw a pretty significant increase in the number of school-age kids during that time period. On the other hand, we saw a big drop in age 25 to 34, and also a drop in 35 to 44. This drop was actually even larger than the increase in the 65 to 74s. And if you think about the 25 to 34 cohort, they're looking for affordable rental units and maybe first-time home buying opportunities, and those really don't exist in San Rafael at this point. Also, just a point that the age distribution really varies by census tract. And if you look at this map of census level data, you can see that in the core canal area, which is this one tract right here, 38% of the population is under 18. But if you go over to Gerstle Park, only 13% of the population is under 18. So there's a lot of variability in the age pyramid in each of our census tracts within the city. So here you see race and ethnicity data for San Rafael in 2010 and 2020. And you can see the changes over that 10-year period. But I want to point out that a lot of the changes that you see between these two pies has to do with the way the census asks residents to identify their race and ethnicity. So in 2010, you had a lot of the Hispanic Latino population identifying white as their race and some as other, but by 2020, based on census methods and so forth, you had a larger percentage of the population choosing other or choosing Native American for indigenous residents from Latin America. So you also saw a much larger of multiracial responses on the census in 2010. But I think the bottom line here is that the percent of white non-Hispanic residents in the city declined from 59% in 2010 to 51.5. So it's about half and half white and non-white within the city right now. So this slide shows you the language spoken at home by San Rafael residents, and there are roughly 2/3 of the city's residents that speak English only, and about 19% that indicate that they speak English less than very well. And of that percentage, most of that population is speaking Spanish. I think a little over 90% of those in the city who do not speak English very well are speaking Spanish at home. But there are other languages that are also spoken in the city. And San Rafael historically had a fairly large Vietnamese population. That the number of people speaking Vietnamese has now been eclipsed by the number of people speaking Chinese at home. That's now the third most common language in San Rafael, whereas it was Vietnamese in the last census. Important fact down here, which is that half of San Rafael's children, ages 5 to 18, are bilingual, meaning that they speak both English and in most cases Spanish as a second language. So shifting to household data, I mentioned the households in San Rafael have gotten larger. The average number of persons per household in 2010 was 2.44, and it's increased to 2.55. I think this second bullet is really kind of remarkable, that 1 in 3 San Rafael households is a single person living alone. So we have a higher percentage of one-person households than both the county and the region. These bar charts basically compare San Rafael, Marin County, and the Bay Area. And you can see that we have a smaller percentage of married couple family households, larger percentages of single people, and about 29% of all of the households in the city have children under 18 living at home, which is actually a lower percentage than most of the communities in the county. So more San Rafael households are renters than we have seen in previous censuses. Their percentage of renters rose from 46% in 2000 up to 50% now. And it is literally about 11,700 in each renters and owners now. It's virtually a 50-50 split. And you can see it countywide, that is not the case. In Marin County as a whole, 64% of the households are homeowners, and even in the Bay Area as a whole, 56% are homeowners. So we have a higher percentage of renters than most communities in the region. And interestingly, if you break that data down by race and ethnicity, you'll see that this bar chart shows the percentage of households who are homeowners by race and ethnicity. So we've got 61% of our non-Hispanic white residents owning homes. Somebody on our working group has got some background noise. Okay. Not sure if anybody needs to mute. Okay, let's keep going. But you can see here that the rate of home ownership is much lower for persons of color in the city than it is for non-Hispanic white households by a pretty dramatic margin. This is a much larger gap than we see both in the Bay Area and in the state of California. So this is data on overcrowding for renters and homeowners. There is virtually no overcrowding this is based on a census definition of what overcrowding is, and that's more than one person per room. So among owner-occupied households, it's almost non-existent. 0.4% of owner-occupied households are considered overcrowded. But among our renter households, about 22% of the housing stock is considered to be overcrowded, meaning that there's more than one person per room. And in fact, 12% has more than 1.5 persons per room. So shifting again to some employment data, this is a really important driver behind our housing needs, the characteristics of our job base and where the residents in San Rafael work, where the folks who work here live. On the left, you see where did San Rafael's employed residents work? And again, this is data from 2019, so it predates COVID. It's a little bit frustrating, but we really don't have a good data source right now. And if we did, we don't know if it's going to be permanent or if it's going to change in a couple of years. But this is the data before the pandemic, which tells you that about 40% of all of the employed residents in the city also worked in the city, and another roughly 30% worked in Marin County somewhere else. There's as maybe fewer commuters to San Francisco than one might think, and you can see some commuting to the other Bay Area counties in the smaller wedges on the pie chart. We have more jobs in San Rafael than we do employed residents. We are an employment center in the region, and most of our workforce is commuting in from somewhere else. 27% of the workforce, in other words, the number of people who work in San Rafael, also live in the city. About 30% are commuting in from other places in Marin County. And then you can see where the rest of the workforce lives and commutes from. And again, pre-March 2020, when everything changed. So employment is a big indicator of income, and Marin County is one of the highest income counties in California, and you can see that's reflected here. These are the definitions of each of the income groups that are used by HCD, the Housing and Community Development Department in Sacramento, for determining what each community's need is. For a household of 4, if you're earning $146,350 a year, you're considered low income. That is the top of the income threshold for low income. If your housing costs are 30% of that, then your affordable monthly housing cost is $3,294 a month. And 30%, again, is a benchmark used by the state and many federal programs for how much a household should be spending on housing. And that includes your utilities and homeowners insurance and things like that. So what this is showing us is the distribution of our households in the city of San Rafael by income category. You can see that San Rafael, relative to Marin County and the Bay Area, has a higher percentage of low and very low income households. So this 20% is earning less than 30% of the area-wide median income. And then there's 13%. These are very low income households, representing about a third of all households in San Rafael, compared to 26% in Marin County. And you can see at the other end, about 43% of our households are above moderate income, which is a smaller percentage than in the county and in the region. And one of the results is that we have a mismatch between the wages of many of the people who work in San Rafael and the cost of housing in the city. This is just a sample of jobs from the Bureau of Labor Statistics for the 9-county Bay Area, and what the wages are for those jobs, and what the rent would need to be for the housing to be considered affordable. And again, this assumes one worker per household. We know many of our households have multiple wage earners. But even with 2 wage earners, it's difficult to afford typical housing in the city. And these are typical rental prices. This is just pulled straight off of Craigslist, pictures and advertised rents for studios, 1-bedrooms, and so forth are generally higher than the wages that are being paid for our lower income and very low income workforce. One of the outcomes of that is that many residents are spending more than 30% of their income on housing, particularly among renters. What you see here is that we've got 29% of our renters in San Rafael who are spending more than half of their income on their housing costs. Much smaller percentage among homeowners, but it's still significant. 14% are spending more than half, and about a third are spending more than 30% of their income. But among renters, it's really a more burdensome impact because many of the renters are lower income and have less income, disposable income to begin with, and other expenses. As you might imagine, if you are extremely low income in the city, the chances are much more likely that you will be cost burdened with rent that exceeds 30% or 50% of your income. So for our extremely low income households, these are generally households that are earning less than $25,000, $30,000 a year. About 64% are spending more than half of their incomes on housing. If you go up to the moderate income households, it's a much smaller wedge of these bars. And you can see it's really an exponential chart here that if you are in those lower income brackets, you will be cost burdened most likely by your housing cost. Also, race and ethnicity is a factor in looking at our housing burden. If among white non-Hispanic households, well, 16% are spending more than half of their incomes on housing. Among Hispanic households of all races, it's almost 40% that are spending. Again, we're talking 50% of housing, 50% of income, household income on housing costs, which is the statistic you see highlighted here. So again, moving through our data document, getting into the
Barry?
special needs. Yes, please.
I just noticed that Cesar has his hand raised. Cesar, did you have a comment or question? Oh, you're on mute. Cesar, you're on mute.
Yes. Do you happen to have income levels by race and ethnicity in San Rafael, and as well as the race and ethnicity breakdown in terms of the job industries?
We do have income by race and ethnicity, definitely. We don't, or at least I don't have that information for individual job types. So yeah, I'd be curious where that might come from.
Okay.
But yeah.
Perhaps more in an economic forum.
Mm-hmm. Good
Okay.
suggestion. Okay. I promise you I'm more than halfway done. Just a few more to go. Okay. So we have special needs groups that are highlighted. Again, this parallels what the state requires. And the first special needs group that is profiled are older adults. We did see a 36% increase in the 65 to 74 population between 2010 and 2020, the fastest growing segment of San Rafael's population. And it's disproportionately high in homeowners. So we have 43% of the city's homeowners who are over 65, and 17% of the owner-occupied units in San Rafael are owned by someone over 65 living alone. We also have a higher percentage of our older adults who are in the low and very low income categories, and a higher rate of cost burden due to high costs and disabilities. Persons with disabilities are another special needs group, and that about 8% of the city's population is identified by the census as having one or more disabilities. This could be a hearing disability or a sight disability or movement or mobility disability. There are a number of different categories that are used. And about a third of that population is in our labor force and is employed. About 2,000 residents in the city have an independent living disability that may require care, on-site care, or special provisions. And 500 San Rafael residents have developmental disabilities. And we do have a relatively new requirement in the housing element to evaluate the specific needs of populations with developmental disabilities. Persons experiencing homelessness is one of the most critical needs groups that we look at. Most of the data that we reference in the housing element is from a point in time count that was done more than 2 years ago, actually more than 3 years ago now. I believe that this is soon to be updated, but in 2019, the data showed that the number of unhoused residents in San Rafael had actually gone down during that 4 years between 2015 and 19. But we have some recent survey work of people who are living in vehicles that shows that that may not. We do the next point in time survey, an increase, a survey of people in vehicles, percent increase between 2019 and 2021 in Marin County. Okay. Oops, I'm going to go back up. Sorry, skipped one. Large families and female-headed households. This is, again, 2 additional groups that the census asks us to evaluate. Large families are families with 5 or more persons, and that represents 9% of the city's households. A disproportionately large number of those households are renters and very low income. There's also a higher incidence of overcrowding. You have the population with the largest household sizes living in some cases, the smaller part of the city's housing stock. In other words, the rental housing stock on average is much smaller than the owner-occupied housing stock, but you have large families in disproportionate numbers in those units. We also have a significant number of single women with children in the city, and I think it's interesting to look at these 2 statistics down here, which is the median income for single parents, single female parents with kids at home versus married couples with kids, both parents present. And this is data just for the city of San Rafael, showing about a 3.5 time difference between those 2. Final part of the presentation talks about our housing stock. You can see here that about half of the homes in San Rafael are single family homes, attached or detached. These are townhomes in this orange wedge. And then multifamily, we have a number of duplex, triplex, fourplex areas, and then quite a large number of multifamily units in the city, and then roughly 400 mobile homes in San Rafael. So this shows you the age of housing in the city. It's pretty evenly distributed across some of these decades. Each one of these pie wedges represents a decade. A large number of homes built in the 1950s and 60s, but more than half of the city's housing stock is now more than 50 years old. Some of that housing stock is showing signs of deterioration, and there's an ongoing need for maintenance and repair, particularly for units that are occupied by large households. So our vacancy rate, this is fresh data from the 2020 census that told us that 4.7% of all of the housing units in San Rafael were vacant at the time of the census. The rental vacancy rate was 3.8% and the owner rate was 0.7%. This is how that compares to Marin County and the Bay Area. We had a larger percentage of vacant units for rent than the county as a whole and the Bay Area as a whole. In terms of the bedroom count, what you see here is that more than half of the housing units in San Rafael have fewer than, or 2 bedrooms or fewer. If you just look at the rental housing stock, 84% of our rental housing stock is 2 bedrooms or fewer. And the other 16% are mostly single family homes that are being rented by their owners. They're not apartment complexes with 3 and 4 bedroom units. They're houses basically that are being rented. So most of our housing stock that's in rental apartments is 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. So housing value, you're going to get to see my fancy animation here over 2013 to 2021. Housing prices increased by 70% from 808 to 1.37 million in December 2021. And there was a big difference between the price for single family homes and condos. Condos were less than half the price of single-family homes. This is based on December 2021 data. Single-family homes have seen a pretty enormous increase in the last 2 years, 30% increase in value compared to 15% for condos. And you'll see this in the report, but most of this data is from private industry real estate sources like Zillow and Redfin. They track this data monthly. We had 64% of all homes in central San Rafael selling for over asking price and 48% in North San Rafael selling for over asking. That's just for December. And if you are a single family, if you are a resident who is earning less than $300,000 and you don't have a big down payment and you're not reselling a house, it's going to be difficult to buy the median priced home in San Rafael. I think that's it's kind of eye-opening when you think about it in that context. In the rental market, we've seen a 47% increase during the 2010s and another 6% since 2019. There's some private industry data out there that tells us that the average rent is about $2,300 a month. If you're a household earning $55,000 a year, that will represent half of your annual income. And there's a pretty big variation in the rental market. New apartments with lots of amenities are almost double the rent that is charged for some of the older housing stock with few amenities. So this is the last slide, just a few takeaways. We didn't really talk about this in the presentation, but we've really seen new construction lagging since 2010. That population increase took place without a lot of housing added, without almost any housing added. But our population's growing despite the lack of construction. More kids and older adults translates into a need for more family housing, more senior housing, affordable assisted living. We've seen more overcrowding, more demand for home expansion with larger households. We have an aging housing stock with growing maintenance needs. A pretty good, strong demand for condos and rental apartments, given the fact that housing for sale has become unaffordable to so many of our residents, particularly first-time buyers, and a continued need for rental assistance and services for our very low and extremely low income households. So that's what the data tells us. And now we want to hear what you tell us. Thank you for bearing with me as we unrolled all of that data. I think we're going to move into comments and feedback. And maybe just before we go around and ask each of you to share your thoughts, just check to see if there are any questions or comments on any of the information that was in the slides or in the report that was provided before the meeting. Feel free to chime in or yeah. Yes.
You just ended with a question, and I hate to misinterpret what you mean when you say, so that's the data, but from your perspective, what does the data tell us? Because I have a different context around what the data may tell us, but the data is one thing. Mm-hmm. But from an assessment of that data, what is your takeaway?
So
what
that
does the data tell you?
Yeah, no, that was really the intent of that last slide that I had up on the screen was what the data tells me was that information about, you know, we're experiencing more overcrowding. There's a need for larger rental housing. There's a need for more improvements to help residents who are aging in place. We have this gigantic gap for between very low income, what very low income households can afford versus what is out there in the market. I mean, there were a number of bullet points on the last slide that was intended to summarize that. Yeah. And I'm glad to see a couple of hands are going up, and let's start with Omar and then Linda.
Thank you, Barry. very powerful story. I think it's not a question, just a comment. I know that we need to rely on the census because one of the most powerful data sources that we all use, but we need to recognize there was an undercount, especially in low-income communities. They are concentrated in low-income neighborhoods. And just to remind people, the response rate in low-income community, in the canal, it was, if I'm not mistaken, just looking at my notes, it was almost 3% less, close to 3% less than 2010. So the numbers that you're presenting really are not the real representation of what we're talking about. We're talking about renting, we're talking about density, we're talking about demographic information around ages. So I just want to bring this to everyone's attention. The numbers that we're seeing are below to what the reality is in our communities.
Thanks, Omar. That's an excellent point. Linda?
I have a similar comment about numbers, but not census. It's just that the affordability levels in Marin County are skewed by the astronomical salaries in a very few communities. In Belvedere, and Tiburon, and Ross, and unincorporated Marin. And it results in these absurd levels of affordability. It's actually to our benefit, but I think it really hurts people who are, the kind of folks that Andrew Henning loses sleep about, who are at the extremely low income place. It's very hard to really provide the affordable housing that's needed for extremely low income people. Because of that, a while ago, I tried to take a stab at figuring out what would it be, the median income if we took out the those communities, and it was about a 20% difference. And so I'd just be curious if you've thought about that. If you have, we can't change it, but it's like Omar, it's just something to remember that it's a little more challenging, and there are more people in need than those numbers show.
I completely agree with you, Linda. And I think that's why we look at the income distribution and find out that 50% of San Rafael's households are considered low income. And that shakes your perception of the community. Like, wait, what? But what is the definition if that's what we're seeing? And how are we making sure that those who need assistance are getting it if someone who's making $174,000 a year can be low income? So yeah. Okay, I think this is really where we're going to transition into hearing from each of our members about housing needs, and unless there are other comments before we do that.
And Barry, I just want to note for any attendees listening in for the public, I see one hand raised. There will be an opportunity later in the meeting again for public comment. So we look forward to hearing from you then.
Great, thank you. Okay, would anyone like to kick us off with thoughts or remarks? Amy, go ahead, thank you. And you're on mute right now.
Sorry, you're welcome. So Barry asked me to look at housing needs vis-a-vis neighborhoods, and because I haven't surveyed the housing needs in the different neighborhoods, I can't speak from that perspective, but I can speak a little bit and briefly about, generally speaking, what neighborhoods mean and the kinds of housing that has been my observation that neighborhoods need. To start with, neighborhoods are communities, and there's a sense of we're all in this together, and there's a cohesiveness. And there is also, I think, the primary reason that neighborhoods are formed and remain intact is that the people who live in virtually every neighborhood are interested in a good quality of life. They're interested in living in a safe area. They are interested in quality housing. They're interested in services. They're interested in accessibility to amenities for their families or if they're single. And that could mean parks, community centers, nature, libraries. And as much as everybody would like to accommodate more neighbors, there is a sense that neighborhoods are fragile. And by that, I only mean that this cohesiveness that people say, you know, I live on this street and it's just wonderful. These people that, you know, things can really be broken by heedless development. And one of the reasons that I'm very interested in bringing this perspective forward is not from an anti-housing perspective, but of a let's be careful with it so that what is built, what is offered to fulfill the needs that we must fulfill, you know, as part of our state mandate, that it works for not just the people who are living in the neighborhood, but for the people who are coming into the neighborhood, so that they're not in a cold building that doesn't allow for interchange and community, and that they're in effect that the neighborhood amenities and all that are not destroyed by the placement of the building, etc. I also want to mention legal housing is super important. Some neighborhoods are more dense than others, and it's extremely important that things like fire safety be considered. You mentioned the older housing stock. I've walked to every single household in Gerstle Park many times, delivering newsletters and also voter registration and Democratic Party functioning. And there are many, many, many illegal dwellings, which means that many of them are not being maintained, and they are dangerous to the people living in it. If they're dangerous, if any dwelling is dangerous to the people living in it, it's dangerous to the people next to them. And that circles back to safety. Another element about neighborhoods that I believe is intrinsic is that people like stability. You know, nothing wrong with new neighbors, people, you know, welcome, you know, all that kind of thing. But what isn't good is, be they homeowners or renters, people coming and going and having great turmoil because what part of this cohesiveness that people like in a neighborhood, be a city block in Manhattan or in Chicago where I'm from or in San Rafael, is getting to know your neighbors, you know, knowing you can rely on one another, and also knowing about them. And that being legal, part of that is accessibility and being able to house disabled people, etc. I think there's a real a call from every neighborhood to be able to, as Joanne has pointed out many times, to house people who work in the city. That's something that really matters. Everyone likes to know if there's a firefighter or a city hall worker or a county worker, whatever, someone who works in one of the businesses nearby that helps us connect to our town. So you see, Barry, this isn't any kind of a nuts and bolts thing about what neighborhoods, what their needs assessment is, but it's more of a lens. Now you're muted.
Thank you, Amy. I was just thanking you for your comments and agreeing with your remarks.
You're welcome.
I actually would like to ask Tom Monahan if he would go next, just because I know he has to leave early. And Tom, if you're able to do that, and then we'll go to Cesar after that.
Barry, there's
Yes.
one last thing. So, diversity is something that matters in a neighborhood also. And I really mean that. There is this town we have big hearts in this town, and people don't feel comfortable if they look around and everybody starts looking like them, I think that that speaks really for the neighborhoods in San Rafael.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Barry. This is Tom Monahan. That was quite an impressive slideshow with a lot of great data that I wasn't fully aware of. I guess from my point of view, we are a investor and real estate developer in the Bay Area, and a lot of our focus has been in Marin County. Over the last 30 years, we've built quite a lot of housing and are continuing to try and do that. So I'm just a supporter of all forms of housing. I think the more that we build, the more we can create opportunities for all different classifications of different income folks. So I really don't have much to add other than, I'm excited to listen to other people's opinions and feedback and support whatever housing can be created. I think the new downtown plan in San Rafael is very exciting. We have a couple of projects which we're working on now, which we hope to bring forward later this year. So that's really all I have to offer, is just to encourage this process and support all efforts to create more housing.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, let's hear from Cesar.
Yes, so appreciate the level of detail on the data, and personally on my end, not surprising. It's just basically affirming on so many levels. With regards to quality of life, I want to be clear that quality of life, I think we all share in this room, that we all want good, safe neighborhoods, good quality schools, affordability, and so forth. And so when I think about, my experience as a longtime resident, having grown up in the canal, from 1978 all the way to the mid-90s, I often pondered the idea or the question of who gets to decide and how are systems established in a way that one group gets to decide what is quality of life for them and what is quality of life for us. And then clearly, as had been a long-time canal resident, part of what I'm advocating for is we've never really been in any political tables or decision-making processes that gives weight and credence to the suffering and to the struggles of our quality of life issues. So I want to just point that out as one perspective. And then two, I also want to offer, that yes, diversity is good, and we actually are very diverse in San Rafael. We're the most diverse, if not one of the most diverse cities in the county. But I want to make a distinction between diversity and segregated diversity. Okay, so I want to also remind folks that this has been done systematically over time, as evidenced by where I grew up in the canal. It's all renters and no ability to purchase homes for anyone like that. And I grew up in a 2-bedroom, apartment with a family of 6 family members. And fortunately, with my relative privileges to academics and whatever pursuits and opportunities have come my way, I was able to, to get out and live a relatively, privileged life on so many levels. But my greater point is this, that if we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion, and we're going to talk about quality of life, that we don't start putting our tents and saying, I'm from this neighborhood, I'm from that neighborhood, I'm from this neighborhood. Because that is essentially what we have in place. Everyone is staking their claims in their geographic locations about what it is that they're willing to protect and maintain and sustain, while the ones who have historically and currently been left out and locked out have been the ones who we've been talking about, which speaks about the data. So I just want to sort of expand the conversation of opportunities, rather than looking at it from a myopic view of this is what I represent in my neighborhood from Gristle Park. I come from Terra Linda. Do I need to go ahead and start staking my claim? This my Terra Linda community that I'm representing. That's not the way I operate. I operate from the standpoint of what is the greater good of the whole entire city. So I just want to put that as a perspective.
Barry, this is Diana. There's someone in the audience who would like to make a comment but has to leave for another meeting. Is there a chance to do that or not?
I see I was muted when I was responding. Well, really not. I mean, I think that there's, yeah, we really are trying to keep this according to our agenda. So if they can send a comment by email, that would be great. Thanks. Sorry to whoever that is.
And so feel free to send any public comment as well if you're not able to stay on the call to housing@cityofsanrafael.org. That was housing@cityofsanrafael.org.
Thank you, Alexis. Okay, so we're going to go to Daniel and then to Omar. Daniel.
Thanks. And I really wanted to piggyback off of what Cesar was saying, because I thought it was really an amazing point. And like him, I found a lot of this data coming from a affordable housing nonprofit, not very surprising. But, you know, I do sound like a broken record on these calls, but, you know, you'd be shocked how many times I hear at community meetings, oh, you know, we are so supportive of affordable housing. Supportive housing is, you know, great. It just doesn't fit this community. Have you thought about the canal? Or in Mill Valley, oh, have you thought about Marin City? That just seems like a much better place to put this kind of housing. And Palo Alto, have you taken a look at East Palo Alto? You know, we're very supportive of affordable housing. We're all very good liberals here, but you know, this type of housing seems like it would fit more of the character of East Palo Alto. I've heard this so many times and it is so frustrating. So while I do believe in the nature and the character of communities, you know, this is how we end up with these segregated communities, right? Because in the wealthy communities, they have the ability to come down and stake their claim and set up the, you know, the guardrails. And, you know, in places like the canal, people are working multiple jobs. People can't come down and say, does this make sense in my community? So I thought that was a great comment, and I just wanted to piggyback off of it. And it is again why I think that, you know, doing affordable housing zoning overlays and doing streamlining processes for affordable housing is so key if the city is actually serious about meeting its RHNA numbers.
Barry, you're muted.
I just realized that. Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. Let's go to Omar.
Thank you, Barry. I think I just support just Daniel and Cesar's comments, and I'm gonna just expand a little bit more from a different angle. Again, once again, although the census numbers they were just presented to us does not represent the reality of our communities for the reasons that I share, you know, the criminalization of the immigrant community, defunding the census process, and many other reasons what happened in the last 2 years. Those numbers are already strong enough to demonstrate the inequities that we have in our city. And I mentioned at the last meeting, these racial inequities are connected to policies. And we really need to use this as an opportunity to look, how can we change that? So that's one initial comment. And I'm here representing a community that usually is not represented, or usually their voices are not being heard enough. But during the crisis, they were essential workers. And now in this post-crisis, they're just low-skilled workers back again, right? So it's very easy to repeat the historical mistakes that we have made in our cities, in our counties, when we're talking about housing, when we're talking about education, when we're talking about health and many other issues. In the 2040 General Plan, we already identified as goals to prioritize renters, low-income renters, and anti-displacement strategies. So in addition to be looking at housing supply, building housing, I would like to spend time here to start looking about policies to protect low-income renters that happens to be our essential workers in our economy. When you saw the growth in our community, right, that growth, that we really, I would love to see that they segregate that information to see what I represent the Latino community. I'm pretty sure that they are represent that power of the grow represent is connected to the Latino community in big numbers. And also the Latino community is the very young demographic. They are the essential workers for many businesses in the city of San Rafael and also in the county. And sometimes when we talk about housing for the essential workers, we're thinking about firefighters, police officers, teachers, and I'm supporting that. But I want to make sure that we expand in this group the understanding of essential workers. The essential worker is also the person that support your household, cleaning your house, taking care of your children, and supporting many other businesses. So when we talk about housing development for low-income communities, we need to also consider the community, the people that already are in our communities. They are using 60 or above 60% of their income to pay the rents. So we need to be looking at, and I know that perhaps rent control is something that everybody is afraid to talk about it, but I would like to bring this back to this group because it's time for us to really respond to the housing crisis in a completely different way that we have done in the past, and not be afraid to have those conversations, and not be afraid to recognize the contributions they or essential workers are making in the city of San Rafael and in the county. So I would love to, in one point, to have conversations about policies to protect tenants, in addition to developing housing, because the land in Marin County, 85% of the land in Marin County is already protected. That 15%, the rest is mostly developed. So we really have very few open spaces, and we concentrate that conversation about housing development when already is mostly developed. So let's not minimize the importance of tenant protections in this conversation, as also continue advocating for more housing in the city. Thank you.
Thanks, Omar. I see Andrew has his hand up.
Yeah, hey everyone, good evening. Barry asked me to speak a little bit about the housing needs of people experiencing homelessness, and I'll maybe opine a little bit on what I've been hearing, because I definitely agree and have some thoughts. But the thing that's been really, I've been thinking about during this meeting and seeing the stats, and is just really, like Omar was just saying, there are so few opportunities to build that when we do build, I would really advocate for much denser housing and considering creating more studios, efficiency units. The term that's coming to mind for me is really SROs. And when you think about homelessness as an example, in downtown, there's the Voyager Carmel program next to St. Vincent's, where you have, I think it's close to 30 people in the building. On 4th Street, you have 1111 4th Street, which Homeward Bound operates. It's SRO units. People pay about $550 to live there. I mean, these are like incredible opportunities. And they don't, there's no negative impact in the community. It's just people just live there and that's their home. So I think whatever the city can do to try to advance creating more of those kind of SRO efficiency units, and really to this equity point, making sure that it's zoned or allowed throughout the entire city, I think is really, really critical. And just to make a note on that, just from kind of like the human perspective, I think there's kind of this interesting thing happening right now around homelessness. And you sort of see it with the city's safe sleeping area. You see it with the pallet homes and the tiny home villages that are popping up, is that I think most people that are experiencing homelessness, they're not trying to buy a home. I mean, that'd be incredible, but most people are not trying to buy a home. They're not trying to live in a single family home. They are happy and literally, or at least sufficient enough, in a 10 by 10 unit or something like that. And so I think being able to create these housing interventions that are relatively affordable compared to regular developments, and again, can be distributed throughout the community are really critical. On that note, and Allie knows this because we tried for like 3 years to do it. Again, I think allowing, churches or faith-based organizations, which are scattered throughout the city, to be able to do projects like that with very little, administrative red tape, I think that would be a good idea. And then the other thing I would say that, again, I think reinforces this is the number of people that you have living in vehicles. So the homeless point in time count is happening. It happened today, but the one that happened last year was just about vehicles, and it showed a doubling of people living in their vehicles. And I think a lot of that are people that are working. It's a lot of seniors that are getting, just cost of living. Where are they going to live? And I think one of the issues when we've looked at safe parking programs in the past is that these programs are always meant to be transitional. So it's, you have 6 months, you can stay in your vehicle, but then you have to move on. But the reality is there's nowhere for people to move. And so if people are basically, you know, living in an RV or living in their car, can we provide a safer place for them to be that, again, maybe is smaller than what we typically think of as housing, but I think actually works for a lot of people, that especially single adults and maybe seniors who are single. And then the final thing I would just say, again, kind of piggybacking on a little bit of the previous comments is, you know, having been involved with many of the city's renter protection policies, you know, it's just to me like very heartbreaking to see this sort of, on one hand, the ballooning equity, home equity that people are seeing, and then the rent increases that people are seeing, and the inability for people to save to be then part of that equity boom. And so to whatever extent we can create home ownership opportunities through this, explore, you know, land trust models or something like that for people to be able to enjoy some equity gains, I think that would be so needed. So hopefully that's helpful for the group.
Thanks, Andrew. Cesar, did you have another comment? And then we're going to go to Lorenzo.
Yes, just real quickly. I forgot to mention part of my experience living in Marin and Santa Fe, more specifically. And this is in the past and the present, that I think this, I just want to call out what's invisible and what perhaps is often hardly talked about. The canal is the servants' quarters. That's our moniker when I was growing up there. That everyone knew that if you want to go ahead and go get cheap labor and all of that, go to servants' quarters. It wasn't even to the degree just say the canal neighborhood. It's just literally, and this is what's internalized in the community. So I just wanted just to point that attention in the backdrop of what we're talking about. The second component of this is that, you know, I work for or serve on multiple boards regarding housing and so forth. And, you know, at this juncture, the only perspective that I could really offer that is of meaning and of value and persistently, which is not a strategy, but it's what is rental protection and rental assistance. That is the only game in town that I see that people are dealing with regards to housing, with regards to the housing shortage and the housing issue. So there's nothing really proactive about that. That's all reactive. And I'm interested in the long game of policy reform and so forth. And in thinking about that, I want to also highlight some pieces around the idea of TOPA, you know, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. You know, there are good models out there that I think that may be showing some promises. And last month, I indicated that perhaps one of the stakeholder groups that really need to be in this conversation are the banking institutions, because when we really talk about permanency, it's really asset building and asset and wealth accumulation and wealth investments at this point. Because we're not going to see our way out of this by just simply having more rents and more apartments and more condos. That really, if we're going to get to the root of some of these things, that we need to also begin to have some conversations around how people, working class folks of all ethnicities and backgrounds and diversities, you know, really need to also take shape in how to connect them to banking institutions in which they can actually have, you know, the American dream, if you will, right, of owning a home. And that I think has, and city government, I believe, has a role in that. Thank you.
Thanks, Cesar. Good points. Lorenzo?
Wow, rich, deep conversations. There's many places I can go in this dialogue from my experience of living here in Marin, living in San Rafael, owning a home in San Rafael, owning a business in San Rafael, and working in many platforms here in San Rafael. But one of the things that I'm sitting with right now that we need to begin to talk about, there's this institute called the Groundwater Institute. And if you haven't heard of this institute, I recommend that you Google it. But the question is, how did we get here? So we might be attempting to solve what's above ground, but it's what's underneath that we need to really start identifying and talking about to ensure that there are some inroads in addressing some of these conversations. And please don't, I'm just going to be honest, vulnerable, and reflective. We are talking about institutionalized racism. You understand the impact of what we're discussing. We're not just talking about building a home or building an apartment complex. We're talking about how do we dismantle some of the systems and practices that has brought us to this point. So when we talk about home ownership, and you gave a nice presentation on home ownership and those living in the homes and the value increasing, we're talking about generational wealth. We're talking about generational wealth that then gets passed down. We're talking about equity that can then be pulled out, that can be used to support nice homes, second homes, nice cars, fancy meals, restaurants, whatever that might be. And to a point I just heard a moment ago, you put that in comparison to the rentals and the rent going up with the largest population that really can't afford. So we also need to start talking about what is the impact that we're experiencing. So it's not just about the homes, it's about the health. Well, if 60% of my income is going towards my bed, I have little to spend on healthcare. I have little to spend on nutrition. You look at our health rate, it's off the chart with minority population here in Marin. I have little money to spend on primary, secondary education. Now I'm really faced with the opportunity to have a job that's comparable to some of the people I engage with at school. So there's many, many things that we need to start looking at that's not just about dropping a piece of a property on the land. We have to start also talking about what is the impact that we're experiencing, what's the impact that we want, and how did we get here? Of course, we don't want to, we can dive deeply into redlining conversations. But someone, I think it was perhaps Daniel brought up a conversation, or someone did, about, well, let's just build it in Marin City. Let's just build it in East Palo Alto. There's a term that you should be familiarized with, and that's called marketness. Marketness is defined in the business science that states standing out as unusual or different or difficult or not the norm. So when we mark a territory or an area, we're also saying that we're bringing in subtle unconscious racism into the conversation. You understand the impact of that? So there's many facets to this conversation that we're talking about that has feeders into all of our life experiences. So that is the point that I wanted to make. And the data, yes, the data shows us a lot, but it's what's the impact of that data? We have kids not graduating from school. We have a high population that's in our prison system, right? So there's many impacts to housing that people, I think, when we start talking about not in our backyard, there's many impacts. So I just wanted to land and have that conversation be heard from my lens as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, as it relates to a business owner, as it relates to someone who lives in this community. Thanks.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Thanks very much. I'm gonna see if Diana, if you might go next.
Sure. I'm going to switch things a little bit and just to build on what Lorenzo said, it's an issue of opportunity. If you don't have an opportunity, then there's not much that you can do. The focus of my remarks are going to be on work that the Age-Friendly San Rafael Community Partnership has done on behalf of older adults. And as you may or may not know, the age-friendly movement is started by the World Health Organization in an effort to support healthy living and aging in cities. The aging population is growing. People are living longer, becoming older. And I just want to briefly talk to all of you about the process that we went through. And Linda Jackson can correct anything that I am mistaken about here. We did a survey and we found asked questions, a variety of different questions having to do with housing. How long have you lived in San Rafael? And then we really took, and this data, if it's useful to you, Barry, and your team, you're more than welcome to have the survey data. We broke everything out by neighborhoods. So we had about 21 neighborhoods and we got feedback on that. And then I'm not going to go through all the questions, but one of the questions that we asked, and I just lost my, I think I lost my, no, I didn't. We asked about if you were consider moving, what factors would impact your decision to move? And the highest responses were needing a less expensive home, looking for a home that would support one's needs as one grew older, and also looking for a home in a location that had lower cost of living overall. So you can see that the older population is thinking about these things. But then juxtapose that with folks didn't, when we asked them, if you wanted to stay here and stay in your home, what kind of changes would you want to make? We put in, from grab bars to build an extra room in your home. And overwhelmingly, people did not want to do any of those things. So what I took away from that, and I think the other members of Age Friendly took away, is that there's certainly a lot of what are the options for folks. You own your home, and this is where you live and where you're used to living, and it's your neighborhood, and you've created relationships. But what are other options that are out there? You don't necessarily need a huge home, but what can I get my mind around, and what is out there that I can embrace? And then we also talked to people about if you did decide to move, what options would you consider for the future? We talked about assisted living, senior housing, renting out a portion of your home, sharing your home in exchange for help around the house, adding an ADU, or moving into someone else's home. And overwhelmingly, people weren't willing to even think about those options. So there's a whole educational component that needs to be considered as we think about housing for older adults. We then went to the AARP Age Friendly Index, and for housing in San Rafael, we're 45% on a scale of 100%. So a lot of improvement needed to be done in terms of housing. We have so much housing in Marin where people have to walk upstairs, and accessibility really becomes an issue for folks as they age. Availability of multifamily housing, intergenerational housing, where people can support one another. Older adults can help with kids. Kids can help with older adults. That kind of help that is really needed as we grow older. And then, resoundingly, housing affordability, housing cost burden, and the unavailability of subsidized housing. So those were the issues that came up for us. And I really want to note that the largest number of Marin's low-income seniors live here in San Rafael. The common challenges for residents include expensive housing, other costs of living, urban design patterns and traffic that don't work if you don't have a car, and yet over a third of the respondents to our survey said it's important for them to live in San Rafael. So it's important. We're part of the community. Our needs for housing, the needs in our lives change. And how is the city going to respond to that shifting, the shifting patterns in people's lives? Obviously, one of our domains for our plan was housing. And just want to note how vulnerable older people are to the rising cost of housing. If the rising costs of housing and other costs of living are factored into calculations of poverty, statistics for the hidden poor emerge, revealing large populations of older adults living above the poverty line, but below the elder economic security standard index. What we, the things that we're working on, and we took a lot of our data from the Othering and Belonging Institute, and I think that your group is doing the same thing, Barry, around how Marin is the most segregated county in the Bay Area, and I think you used a lot of that data. You're using that data. So what we're working on as a grassroots group of people, all volunteers, is our issues were existing homes no longer meet the needs of residents in the community, and that begs the question of how do we educate folks that are living in their homes that they can improve their homes in ways that improve their lives as they age. Streamlining retrofitting homes so that they can stay in their homes. So that existing homes, what can we do to help people live longer and meet their needs in their own homes? And one of the things that we really wanted to do was to look at residential facilities. There are plenty of places to live in residential facilities here in Marin, and they're unaffordable. So one of the aspects of that, and this is partly because I'm in the medical field, is that there are medical costs when you live in a residential facility, and how can those be ameliorated by Medicare? And I won't go into that. And then the other piece that our group is really doing, and my participation and Linda's participation in this group, is around affordable housing. And I'm sorry, and I don't have any water. Proactively support and promote affordable housing options and advocate for affordable housing. So that's what the Age Friendly San Rafael Community Partnership is doing.
Great.
Thank you.
Great summary. Thank you for that. And I think we would like to see the survey data, just speaking for staff. Can we go to maybe just looking at who hasn't spoken, Linda, Joanne, and then Don? Okay.
Okay.
Here you are.
I'll probably be a little, well, just support so much of the issues that have been named today. So I'm on representing Sustainable San Rafael and Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative advocates for sustainability and for affordable housing in San Rafael. I just appreciate the assessment. I know it's a critical first step. I got some suggestions that I'll pass you on. What I do these days is I'm program director for the Aging Action Initiative, and it's a collaborative network of professionals who work with older adults in Marin County. So I'll speak with all those hats on. Let's start with you use the word mismatch. There's an absolute mismatch between the housing that was constructed after the war, World War II, what, 70 years ago? And people who've come here that Cesar speaks about so eloquently, and Omar, but people who came in the 70s and 80s because of the civil wars and because of NAFTA and the decimation of the economy in Central America. And no new housing being built. I would note that it's really been since 2000. So it's been 20 years of infinitesimally small number of housing. This is why we export our youth when they graduate from high school, because they don't have an affordable place to live and they're ready to move out of mom and dad's house. But I think mismatch is a major theme in what we're talking about and how to rectify that. You know, San Rafael, you know, Amy, you talked about the neighborhood. So for many people in San Rafael, we just love living here. It's a beautiful place. You know, you're right on the water. You've got the beauty of the hills, and every time, if we're lucky enough to get away, when we come back, we said, this is home, right? I'm so glad I live here. It's a great place was a great place for us to raise our family. But our kids, none of them, we have 4, none of them live here because they can't find a place to live. No. Let's say older people, 80% of them, about it looks like what I see in the literature, want to age. They want to live in their homes. Probably 80% of us on this Hollywood Square page want to live in our homes. So that's not a surprise. The question is, how do older people get to do that? The first baby boomer, I would like to ask this question. We'll see if anyone can answer it. When does the first baby boomer turn 80? It's a year. In what year does the first baby boomer turn 80? Let's see if anybody wants to try making a guess here.
2025.
Very good. That's only 3 years from now. And there's a lot of friggin' baby boomers behind them. I'm in that group. So probably some of you also are in that group. And that's a lot of people. So the largest cohort that came in that you described, we got another decade of that coming in the next housing element. They'll be talking about that too. So they're older women who are living alone in these great big homes. And that's really a challenge. And Diana talked about the survey that we did. If you're renting and you're older, you're fine. But when your partner dies, you'd lose half your rent. And that's an issue that I hear a lot of people that Andrew works with who have older folks saying, I gotta live in my car. So this is, the rental issue is a challenge for older people too. And that comes through in the data that you had. So due to not a lot of housing and not keeping up with the housing needs, just even of the current residents that need choices, not for younger people who grew up here, our own homegrown, not like all the people that Omar talks about who work here, who live here and work here, and who work here and can't live here. So they're on the road with the greenhouse gas emission implications or impacts. We have a real dilemma, I think, with our housing in San Rafael. Now, I don't know if you ever try to get a roofer when it's raining or a plumber when you need a plumber. Nazareth House is mentioned in the assessment. It closed down because they could not find workers, people who could work. And, Nazareth House couldn't pay the livable wage, but you go to stores sometimes, they're closed because there's nobody here to staff them. So there's a lot of solutions. I'll just name some. Not everybody wants to move to a senior segregated community. So when you say senior living, and independent living, thank you. I think SROs are a great option for older people, that they get a smaller place to live in community with other people. smaller condos like anybody else to move into and be independent. ADUs are a fantastic opportunity for older homeowners. The rules have gotten a lot better, but a challenge that I hear about is they got a lot of stuff. I mean, some of you are younger, so you don't have a lot of stuff yet, but you know, you accumulate stuff, especially when you have kids. And people need help getting rid of their stuff so that they can make room to put the ADU in. I think we have potential there. We need to make the most of all of our commercial lands for high density housing. Affordable housing comes in many forms, and we need to be open to innovations. I'd say get rid of density limits altogether and let the developers figure out how many units they can put in that will meet the market that they're trying to meet with their project. And what we're talking about is, in many parts of San Rafael, suburban transformation into livable communities where people can walk, they can have the services, they can live in community with people, not isolation. And more places for people to call home. We have a lot of catch up to do, but I know we can do it with the work that we have and the group that we have.
Thank you, Linda. Let's go with Joanne and then Dawn, and then we're going to actually have to go to the final part of our agenda after that. We'll hear from the public first.
Thanks, Barry. And I apologize, all of you, that I got bumped off. I feel like I missed a little bit, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the report about the data, because I found it absolutely fascinating. And I agree with everything that Linda said. She captured a lot of what I was going to say about our youth that was born and raised here in San Rafael, educated, graduated school, and can't live here. And one of the things that we hear all the time from employers, and we've talked about this before, is that missing middle. I know we have to build more low and very low units, but that missing middle, you know, I'm experiencing it personally and at the chamber. I mean, we have, you know, people at the chamber who make $50,000 to $60,000, and they live with a person who makes the same, but for that income that they can't live here, and their rent is too high. It's too great a percentage of their salary. So it's really challenging. But I did want to talk about a little bit of my vision. We talked a lot today about inclusion. And if we want to have an inclusive community, then we need to have diverse housing stock. So I hear from a lot of younger people, a lot of different age, also older people, but they don't all have the same dream. They all want to own a home or have a path to own a home, but that doesn't always look the exact same. So it doesn't have to be a single family home with a lawn and a driveway. You know, my daughter, who's 28, lives in Berkeley, and I walk her neighborhood all the time. And she lives in an 8-plex, a 2-bedroom 8-plex. Next to her is a single family home with a lawn and a driveway. And around the corner is a multi-unit building where 100 people live. And then, you know, down across the street is 40 condos. And that, to me, is a neighborhood, but it all doesn't look the same. And that's inclusive and diverse neighborhood. And so I think in our city, we have to have policies where there's a diverse stock of housing, of rental and of ownership, with the idea that we're trying to get to a path of ownership for as many people as we can. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Joanne. And Don.
I'm interested in how outside market demand is affecting the ability for local residents to take advantage of home ownership. And I was thinking, in my neighborhood, most people have lived here 30, 40, or 50 years, and there's been very little turnover. But there is one house that was built in 1936. It's what I would consider to be a starter home, 900 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. And it was owned by one family till 2000, when the heirs decided they had to sell it. And it was purchased by a recently divorced woman who wanted a small house in the neighborhood because her friends were here. She actually added a bedroom and a bath to have a boarder to be able to afford the mortgage. Bought it for $455,000. 15 years later, she sold it for $791,000 with multiple competitive offers on the house to a young couple from San Francisco who had one young child. They did minor cosmetic work. Last year, they sold it for $2.2 million. And there were multiple bidders, and they were all young couples from San Francisco who were had tech money, had built up a lot of equity in condos in San Francisco, and could outbid other people. That same house is now estimated by Redfin at $1.4 million 1 year later. And it just seems that both character of the housing stock is evolving, which happens, but the nature of the people moving into the community is different. And within my neighborhood, there are many examples of young tech couples moving into a house in the suburbs to start raising families. And they seem to be driving up the prices and make it more difficult for local residents to ever be able to afford the opportunity for home ownership. And it, for market rate housing, which is the majority of the housing in our community, it trickles down through rentals because some single family homes are rented. And it just, it seems to me that something partly caused by the pandemic, partly caused by people's ability to work at home has created this huge new demand for housing. It is reflected in Barry's PowerPoint numbers, which are astronomical, the way housing prices have increased.
Thank you. Thank you, Don. So I think we've heard from everyone at this point, and I wish we could have more of a conversation as opposed to each person giving their views, but this did seem to be an efficient way given the number of people, and we really wanted to hear from each of you and give you a chance to express your views on this. And I really appreciate the quality of the information and the dialogue that we've just had. I am going to give the public a chance to comment on this, and then we have a few items before we close the meeting. We have about 15 minutes left. So Alexis, can you, I do see at least one hand raised in the audience. Can you maybe bring that person over? Anybody else who would like to speak, if you can use your raise hand feature, we can bring you over to make a comment.
Yes, so Sam, you should now be able to unmute and make a comment.
Thank you so much. My name's Samantha. I know some of you here, and I am the coordinator of the Youth Commission. So I just wanted to uplift that I work with young people and they don't really see a future here for themselves. And I think that that's really sad. And I also wanted to uplift, some people started touching on it, but like I'm 32 and I've grown up in Marin my whole life, and there's not really a path for me to really create any equity or be a homeowner at the pace that I'm going at. And I love my work. I do really important work in the community, and it's really rewarding, but financially I've been kind of stuck. And so I think that we have to find creative ways to really keep talented young people that are really doing really great work and give them ways to be able to live here. So I wanted to uplift those two things. I really appreciated the comments that Cesar and Lorenzo and Diana were making. And I think just like in Marin, it's really difficult to have the real honest conversations because it is connected to race and to things that make people uncomfortable. But I think that we have to address it from multiple angles at the same time. So I think we need to be able to figure out how could people like me and other people become homeowners or get some kind of equity, and in the meantime, how can we have more rental assistance so that our expenses could go down and we would be able to not be so stressed about paying our bills and things like that, And so I think it's really about finding different communities that have, or populations that have things in common, and really creating solutions to help those groups improve their situation. And then I also wanted to say that I grew up in an apartment that's called Pilgrim Park Apartments, and it's Section 8. And so and I grew up there since I was in elementary school till I graduated community college. And so I think that there's a lot of misconceptions of Section 8 and affordable housing and what they look like. And there's buildings that are right in plain sight that people wouldn't think are affordable or provide Section 8 vouchers. And so I think really educating people on places like Pilgrim Park that really have created an opportunity for people to live there, save, and then be able to go and buy houses in Vallejo and other places. So I think that's what I have to contribute today. Oh, and then the last thing is that I found that the presentation was helpful in kind of explaining the situation, but it also is, these are people's lives. Like, I am one of those numbers. And so bringing in lived experience and realizing that the people here that can't afford to live here are dealing with a lot of mental health issues and a lot of stress, because money affects all aspects of our life. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Sam. I have someone on a 415-485 number. You should be able to unmute yourself and speak now.
Hi, this is Victoria DeWitt. I live in the West End neighborhood. And I just wanted to ask if there'd been any calculation of how many illegal units or illegal apartments exist in San Rafael. I know there's a 2-unit property next door to me that they have added a 3rd unit without permit, and I'm sure there are others like that. I just wondered if you had assessed how many of those units are available in the market. The other thing I wanted to mention was I'd like to see more incentives for developers to build smaller homes. It seems that they all want to build 3,000 to 4,000 square foot homes, and I think there's a need in the community for small 2-bedroom, 1-bath homes that more people can afford, that would be available for first-time homeowners. So I'd like to see that. And then I'd also like to comment about the reason why I think that people from San Francisco move to Marin. I've seen this trend particularly in southern Marin, and it may be a factor in San Rafael. But people from San Francisco move to Marin because the public school, to put their children in the public schools here, because it's cheaper than paying for private schools in San Francisco. So I don't know how to address that, but I think that is a factor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victoria. And to your question about the illegal units, I don't know if staff wants to comment on that or respond. I don't have access to data on the number of units. I know that there's pretty aggressive code enforcement activity and rental inspections that turn up that. But Ali, did you want to respond or add anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can try to respond. If there are units that have been created illegally without our knowledge, that's really hard to know because they've been done without our knowledge. And so, no, we don't have really good solid data on what's out there. The best that we have would be units that, where we're aware of it, and as a result, we'll begin enforcement, and the property owners are obligated to then file building permits. But yeah, it's not, without our knowledge, the reason they're in existence, if they are truly not legally built, is because they've been done without any input from us. So.
Yeah, and I think we know that there is some number out there, because the census reported an increase in almost 500 housing units in San Rafael between 2010 and 2020, and we didn't build 500 housing units. So they're counting units that either are illegal or that existed before and weren't counted before, at least some of them. So yeah, I mean, this is an ongoing issue. Amy, did you want to add something to that?
Well, not necessarily add something to that. As I've mentioned before, I think a part of a well-functioning neighborhood is a sense of feeling safe. And I don't know if this is just a big can of worms, but I can't help and thinking, having read about it's not overpopulation. What was the word that was used? Where there are too many people in each unit.
Crowding.
Overcrowding, yeah.
Overcrowding. So if this isn't a vicious cycle, are property owners being held, apartment owners, are they being held accountable in more densely populated areas of San Rafael? So that, I would like to think that you wouldn't have to call code enforcement in order to make sure that there are sprinklers, that there are fire extinguishers, the kinds of things that you would expect in an apartment building, just because some of the inhabitants may be illegal. Is this a vicious circle? Are we not taking care of buildings because people are afraid of being kicked out because they're not legal? The whole thing seems absurd from a safety perspective.
Yep, interesting comment. Yeah. Okay. So I think we're going to close out this item and move to the last part of our agenda, which is member and staff announcements. And we have on our agenda a quick update on the housing survey. And I don't know if Alexis, if you or Jake would like to we talked about this a little bit at our last meeting, if there's anything to report out on.
Just to say that we're still working on the survey. We want to be intentional and thoughtful in the questions that are asked. And so we are looking at that. The city manager's office is looking at that. We may be reaching out to different folks that are a part of this group in your organizations to help us with that. We do want the questions to be phrased in a way that is open and accessible to everyone. I do want to thank all the members of the group for their thoughts and their comments. I think it's especially powerful that we're talking about institutional racism, that we're talking about generational wealth and the loss and the capacity to generate that and create that and to break down barriers. We're very excited for the conversations and the thoughts the group had this evening, and looking forward to more conversation around that and really addressing all of the needs in the community, making sure that everybody's at the table and all voices are heard.
Thank you, Jacob. Are there any announcements from working group members? Anybody else? Okay. We do have a last opportunity for public comment. If there's someone in our audience who didn't get to speak on anything that's not on the agenda or that is, Linda will come back. Let's come back. And Sam, did you have another comment? I don't know if if that raised hand is from before or.
Yeah, it's from before. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Linda, go ahead.
I just have to say, this is an announcement of celebration. So for those who have not heard, if you've been under a rock, on Tuesday, the Board of Supervisors approved the funding for housing for people who are chronically mentally ill, chronically homeless in Larkspur. It was a 3-hour public hearing. Everybody had 1 minute to speak. 5 hours. Thank you, Andrew. And it was a phenomenal show of strength by our elected leaders to say yes. And there's a lot of things still to work out. Well, I keep picking on you, Andrew, but I know this is where you're working, to be worked through. But it's a step in the right direction, and thank God for the public funding that's going to make that possible. And I know the priorities are people of color and the people most in need. So it's a cause for celebration. It shows that change can happen.
Barry, can I follow up on that?
Please.
Thank you, Linda, for announcing that, because that was huge, and that was an amazing display of leadership on behalf of our Board of Supervisors. And I was in another meeting today where we were notified that the county is receiving $50 million in ARPA funds. They have received $25 million to date. And in the first phase, they're going to spend a significant portion of that money to fund more Project Homekey site allocation. So that was really good news. So somehow I say this with a grain of salt and crossing both fingers, but we are moving the political will.
Great, thanks. And did the city of San Rafael also just approve 192 units of rental housing?
Yes, they did. The neighborhood at Los Damos. Yes, they did.
Another
Yes, they
shout
did.
out. Okay.
Yep.
More rental housing is coming. Great. Okay. Any final comments from working group members? We are just approaching 6 o'clock. And I just want to thank everybody for being here and for the quality of this discussion. It's really excellent. To Jacob's point, thank you all. And we will see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.